For acrylic painters, there's a fine line on how much paint to squeeze out onto our palettes. Too little and we won't have enough coverage, and too much and it gets wasted and dries up. This is something I used to worry about a lot, and I see students struggle with it too. So in today's episode, I'm going to cover 10 tips for beating palette waste so that you can save some time and money. I'm actually surprised by this list. I came up with a lot of valuable pointers here. Plus, there's a secret pro-level bonus resource at the end that could very well be a game changer for you. Hello, love. Welcome. My name is Jennifer Laurel Keller. I'm an acrylic and mixed media artist and instructor, and this is the Wild at Art Show. Nobody likes to waste something that they spent money on. But the thing is that when it comes to painting, no matter what your technique, you don't really know how long the painting will take or how much paint you'll need. Acrylic painting is both an art and a science. There are a lot of variables at play, like temperature, humidity, layering, having to make fixes and go back over areas you don't like, as well as just allowing the process to guide you. So there's not a clear formula for determining how much paint you'll need. As I talk about this, I'm making progress on a 24 by 36 acrylic and mixed media abstract on canvas. It's a work in progress, and I'm using paint that I had out on my palette from a different painting project, which was actually the piece I made in my last video. So both of these videos were shot on the same day. So if you like learning about ways to improve your painting experience and you're excited for these tips, click the like button and let's get into the list here. Number 1, remember, paint waste is normal. Betty Frank, a fellow YouTuber, says the only wasted paint is what's left in the tube. And I love this because it's so important to practice. This means that not all of the paint that you squeeze out will get used, and not all of the paintings that you make are going to be winners. You will have waste in the beginning, and as you gain experience, you will still have waste, but maybe a little bit less. Accept that it's part of the game and that you need to waste a little bit of paint to evolve. I would hate for you to limit yourself in the moment just because you're too concerned about this. Letting go and loosening up is such a rewarding mindset, and you can't get there if you're being overly precious. Number 2, use high quality paint, mostly. Quality acrylic paint is expensive, let's just face it. But what's more expensive is buying low quality paint, not getting the results you want, and then spending more to replace it with high quality paint before the old stuff is used up. So what would take me more passes with a lower quality paint, I can now do more efficiently. So in the end, I believe I'm saving money and time. The caveat would be if you wanted to use lower quality paints for an underpainting. Some people like to tone their canvases before they start painting or block out areas of color as a base coat first. But for me, that seems like an extra effort, and I would rather just launch in because having to switch over would interrupt the flow of my process. Number 3, use the proper proportions. The size of your substrate, or in other words, what you're painting on, like a canvas or a panel or paper, will determine how much paint you need and how big of a palette you need. When I work small, like on a 12 by 12 or an 11 by 14 inch canvas, I tend to squeeze out paint amounts that are about the size of a nickel or a quarter, or about a ½ inch to 1 inch across. But if I'm working on a larger piece, I use a slightly larger palette and squeeze out paint dollops that are about 1½ inches to 2 inches across. And of course, this is something that takes time to get the hang of. So the more you practice, the more you'll learn what works for you. Number 4, know your pigment strengths. Each pigment ingredient in your paints has a different personality. It's important to learn about the mixing strengths of these pigments. For instance, when I mix red and yellow together, I get orange. But the red paint is much stronger than the yellow. and that's because of the pigments. So to get a nice orange that's visually in the middle of the red and yellow, I will need to add more yellow and less red. So if you start with the paint with the weaker pigment, which in this case is the yellow, and slowly add small amounts of the stronger color or the red, you'll waste less paint. Otherwise, you'll have to correct it with a whole lot more of the weaker color and end up with way more paint than you probably need and likely a big mess on your palette. For more on pigment strengths, you can look at the back of the container of your paints, and there should be a little chart that says tinting strengths or something like that. So that's a clue. But the best way to test this is to take some time to mix up some test swatches to see how they react with each other. And if you need help with that, I have an online class called Color Quest where you'll learn a lot about mixing and color theory, and I'll link it below for you. Number 5, you will need more white paint down on your palette. Titanium white is by far the most purchased paint at the art supply store. This is because it's the most common paint to mix with. You need white paint to make other colors lighter, which will give your piece more contrast. Adding stronger highlights and contrast to your work is essential to making it look professional. So therefore, more white paint is a must. This is good to know because you don't need to put as much of your other colors down on your palette as you do your white paint. Okay, so we're halfway through this list, and I also have a pro level bonus tip for you at the end that you won't want to miss. So definitely stick around for that. Number 6, use water to prevent your paints from drying out too quickly. If your space is very warm or very dry, you might find that your paint dries up on the palette too quickly. What I like to do every so often is to take a spray bottle with water in it and do one light spritz up in the air and let it mist down onto the palette. You don't want to spray too much water on there or else you could flood your palette. So giving it a light misting will give you a few extra minutes of drying time. Number 7, start a new project. If you finish your current project and you have a bunch of wet paint left over on your palette, you can work on a new project. This is what I'm doing in this video footage right now. I'll keep a new canvas or a work in progress off to the side and spend some time on it. Now, this is possibly easier with an abstract painting because I can go around the palette and pick up whatever's wet still and then use it up in a very loose way. But if you're a landscape painter, for instance, and you work with a more specific color palette, you might still be able to get a fun underpainting down that's more bright. And then you can let that underpainting peek through the painting in the next layer and get an added pop of color. Number 8, you can put some paint into an art journal. You can enhance some pages that you already made in your journal or start an underpainting on a new page. You can also do some test swatches in your journal for practice for your color mixing. That goes back to the idea of knowing your pigments. You can test how your paints react to each other with little swatches and take some notes about what is in each mixture. Okay, just a couple of tips to go plus the bonus. And I just want to let you know that in the next episode of the Wild at Art Show, I'm going to talk about how to determine if you're ready to rent an art studio. This is a big decision, so if that interests you, be sure and double check that you're subscribed to my channel and hit the notification bell. Number 9, have a signature color palette. And by color palette, I mean a group of paints that you like using together. Once you find paints that you really enjoy working with, keeping a signature color palette is a great way to make sure that your leftover paint will work on any of your pieces. So if I finish up piece A and I want to use the leftover paint on piece B, I can confidently do so because I know that they will harmonize together. This is a good idea anyway because when people see your work, they'll recognize it as yours because they're used to your colors. Number 10, care for your paint. Paint doesn't only dry up on the palette, it can also dry out in the container as well. If you're not closing up your paint's lids and caps throughout the painting session, your paint will be exposed to air and begin to dry out. So take good care of your paint. Seal it up well, pick the dried up paint out of the caps so that they close properly. Shake them up before you pour them out. If you have more than one container of the same color, be sure to use one up first before opening the next. And it doesn't hurt to store them away from direct sunlight. The bonus is coming, but I have a quick question for you. What brand of paint do you prefer, or do you have one at all? Let me know in the comments, and if you want help making acrylic artwork to fast track building your skills, I have about 30 online classes for you on Skillshare. Those are linked through my website, which is always linked below. Today I have a class review by Mohini Sina, who took my class Color Quest, how to mix any color in acrylic paint. Mohini says, "Lovely class, I really like the earth tones especially." Thank you. Totally, Mohini. I agree that once you learn about the subtleties of earth tones, a lot will click into place for you. So thank you for joining me for class. If you'd like to check that out or any of my other classes, you'll find it linked below. All right, now the bonus. This was mind-blowing for me personally. The tip is to check out the websites of the brands of paints that you own. These manufacturers will share the specs of their paint so that you can see all of the different characteristics of each product. They talk about the paint's viscosity, tinting strength, color options, opacity, and other tips for using and caring for the paint. I use Golden Paints, and the Golden site is so informative. I also know Liquitex and Winsor Newton have big websites, and you can learn a lot there as well. They do this so that you can become more proficient at using their products and come back to buy more. So the more you know about them, the more they'll have an edge on the competition. So use this resource and you'll have some big breakthroughs, I promise. And if you'd like more binge-worthy inspiration, I'm going to leave a playlist and a recommended video for you here. Happy creating and much love.